All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle the world of business, but maybe not in the way you'd expect. We're cracking open Josh Kaufman's The Personal MBA, and luckily for us, we've got some excerpts our listeners sent in to guide us.
It's like a cheat sheet for a whole business education, right? Like we're getting the Cliff's Notes version of an MBA.
Exactly. And one of the things Kaufman jumps into right away, and this kind of surprised me, is this idea that you don't actually need a traditional MBA to succeed.
Yeah, he kind of goes hard against those classic business school programs.
So it's not just him being a rebel for the sake of it, right?
Yeah.
What are his actual reasons for pushing back against the whole MBA thing?
Well, one big thing he points out is the cost. I mean, those degrees can cost an arm and a leg. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes way more.
Oof, yeah, that's a hefty price tag.
Kaufman argues that a lot of what they teach in those programs is like outdated by the time you even graduate. And maybe the most important thing, he questions this whole idea that an MBA is some sort of guarantee for success.
So it's not the golden ticket everyone makes it out to be.
Exactly. It's not like you get handed a diploma and suddenly, boom, you're a business genius. He actually cites a study by Jeffrey Pfeffer and Christina Fong, and they found there wasn't much evidence to support the claim that business schools actually make their graduates more successful.
Wow, that's pretty eye-opening. So those fancy diplomas don't always equal real-world results.
Hmm.
So what's Kaufman's alternative then? If he's not about the traditional MBA, what's this personal MBA he talks about?
So it's interesting because Kaufman himself didn't go the traditional route either. He went for this self-directed learning approach to get his business knowledge. And he was super inspired by Charlie Munger, the big-time investor who works with Warren Buffett.
Okay, of course.
Munger never got an MBA, but he definitely figured out how to do business.
Yeah, I think we can all agree he's done all right for himself.
Yeah.
So this personal MBA is about taking control of your own education, basically.
Exactly. It's about building your own curriculum, figuring out what you actually need to know to succeed.
That makes a lot of sense. But business, let's be honest, it can feel crazy complicated. Where do you even start when you're trying to learn everything on your own?
That's where Kaufman's framework comes in. He calls it the 5 parts of every business. And he says, no matter how complicated or huge a business gets, you can always break it down into these 5 core parts.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give it to me straight. What are these 5 parts?
All right, here they are. Value creation, marketing, sales, value delivery, and finance. They all work together, kind of like a recipe. You need each ingredient in the right amount.
Makes sense. I'm guessing we'll dig into each of these parts as we go, but before we do that, I got to ask about this whole value thing. It seems like the foundation of everything, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. Value is at the heart of every business. And Kaufman says it's not just about tangible products, like the stuff you can hold in your hand. He breaks it down into 12 different forms of value that businesses can offer. Of course, you've got your products and services, but then you've also got things like shared resources, subscriptions, even loans, insurance, and options.
Hold on. How is something like an amusement park a form of value? I'm not sure I'm following that one.
Think of it like this. The amusement park, it's a shared resource, right? They invest all this money in building the rides, creating the atmosphere, and maintaining the whole experience. You're not buying those things outright. You're paying for the chance to use and enjoy them.
Ah, okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's not about owning, it's about having access.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to another super important point Kaufman makes, finding the right market. He calls this the iron law of the market. And basically what it means is, even if you have the coolest product in the world, if there's no market for it, you're going to fail.
So just having a great idea isn't enough. You really need to make sure there are people out there who actually want what you're offering.
Yeah, that's the hard truth. He uses the example of the Segway to illustrate this point. You remember those 2-wheeled self-balancing scooters?
Oh yeah, for sure. I remember those. Everyone thought they were going to change the world. You don't see them much anymore, though. What happened? Were people just not interested in personal transportation like that?
It's a bit more complicated than that. Yeah, the technology was cool, but they were also expensive and kind of bulky. The real problem was the Segway didn't really solve a problem for enough people. People weren't sure where they'd even use it. Sidewalks, roads, and storing it was awkward. It was more like a solution looking for a problem instead of the other way around.
That's such a good point. It makes you wonder how many inventions have failed because they were just cool, but not actually that useful. So what's the takeaway here? Should entrepreneurs just abandon their passions and chase whatever seems most profitable, even if they don't care about it?
Kaufman calls that the mercenary rule. And while it might sound kind of harsh, he stresses how important market demand really is. You got to make sure there are enough people out there who are both willing and able to pay for what you're offering.
So you're saying there needs to be a balance between passion and practicality. But I'm guessing there's also the opposite problem. People who get so caught up in their passion project that they totally ignore what the market is telling them. Is there a name for that too?
He calls that the crusader rule, and yeah, it often leads to failure. It's that classic story of someone who's so convinced their idea is amazing that they ignore any signs that it might not work.
Makes sense. Passion is important, but it can also blind you to reality. So how do you find that sweet spot? How do you avoid both the mercenary trap and the crusader trap?
Kaufman is all about prototyping and iteration. It's about testing your ideas early and often, getting feedback from potential customers, and then using that feedback to make your product or service better.
So don't get too attached to your initial idea. Be ready to adapt based on what you learn.
Exactly. A great example of this is Fitbit. They didn't just launch with some fancy, fully developed product right away. Nope, they started with simple prototypes, got feedback from users, and then used that feedback to refine their design before investing tons of money into production.
That's smart. It's all about minimizing risk, right? And getting real-world feedback as early as possible. But even with a great product and the perfect market, you still need to actually reach your customers. And that's no easy feat these days.
You got that right. That's where the whole concept of attention and persuasion come in. It's about cutting through all the noise and making a genuine connection with your target audience.
Oh yeah, it's a whole other challenge. What are some of the key things Kaufman highlights when it comes to grabbing attention?
Well, he talks about a lot of different concepts, but some of the most important are understanding your probable purchaser, figuring out your addressability, framing your message in a way that resonates, and then crafting a killer hook and a clear call to action.
Okay, I got to be honest, a couple of those terms need a bit more explanation. Let's start with probable purchaser. Is that just a fancy way of saying target audience?
It's a little more specific than that. It's about figuring out who is most likely to buy what you're selling. But going beyond just basic demographics, you really want to understand their needs, their motivations, what their pain points are.
Okay, so getting super specific about who you're trying to reach. What about addressability?
That one's all about figuring out how to actually reach those probable purchasers. Are they active on social media? Do they read specific magazines or websites? Do they go to industry events? You want to find out where they're spending their time and attention so you can get your message in front of them.
Gotcha. It's like find the best delivery route for your message. But even if you get your message in front of the right people, you still got to grab their attention, right?
Right.
How do you make your message stand out in a world where everyone's bombarded with marketing?
That's where the hook comes in. It's got to be something that grabs their attention instantly, makes them curious, makes them want to learn more.
So I'm imagining things like catchy slogans, maybe some eye-catching visuals, or even a little bit of controversy.
Yeah, those could all work, but it depends on your brand and who you're talking to. A good hook could also be a thought-provoking question, a surprising statistic, a personal story, or even just something funny.
It's all about finding that unique angle that will resonate with your audience and make them actually stop and pay attention, right?
Absolutely. But even the best hook in the world won't get you very far if you don't have a clear call to action.
So you got to tell people exactly what you want them to do, like visit our website, download the app, or buy now.
Bingo. Your call to action needs to be super clear, easy to follow, and ideally it should create a sense of urgency or scarcity.
Oh, you mean like those limited time offers or only a few spots left kind of things?
Yeah, exactly. People are more likely to take action if they think they might miss out on something. But it's not just about grabbing attention and pushing for a sale, right? You got to build trust and reputation too. 100%. People are smarter than ever, and they're being hit with marketing messages from every direction.
So how do you cut through all that and build genuine trust?
Kaufman talks about the importance of framing your message. It's about presenting your ideas in a way that connects with your target audience and positions you as someone they can trust and rely on. He uses this really interesting example of a study that looked at how people respond to information about a disease outbreak.
Okay, color me intrigued. Tell me more about this study.
So researchers took two groups of people and gave them the exact same statistics about a potential disease outbreak. One group was told that a certain percentage of people would be saved by a particular intervention, while the other group was told that a certain percentage would die without the intervention. The numbers were the same, just the way they presented the information was different.
So it's like the classic glass half full versus glass half empty
Mm-hmm.
scenario. Did they find that people responded differently based on how it was framed?
Oh, absolutely. The group that was presented with the lives saved framing was way more likely to support the intervention, even though the information was statistically the same.
Crazy, right?
It's amazing how much the way you present information can influence people. Totally. And it goes beyond individual messages. Building a solid reputation takes time and consistency. You got to keep your promises, offer amazing customer service, and really show people that you genuinely care.
It's about building those long-term relationships, not just going for the quick sale.
Exactly. It's about creating a community around your brand.
Okay, so you've created something valuable, you've found the right market, you've captured their attention, you've built trust. What's next?
Next comes the art of negotiation, where you try to find an agreement that works for everyone involved.
So this is where things get a little tense.
Not necessarily. Kaufman's approach to negotiation is more about finding common ground than about winning or losing. It's about understanding what you need and what the other person needs, and working together to reach a solution that benefits both sides.
I like that approach. It takes some of the pressure off, makes it feel less like a battle. But at some point, got to talk about money, right?
Yeah. You bet. And that's where pricing comes in. Kaufman talks about this thing called the pricing uncertainty principle, which basically says people are naturally unsure about how much they should pay for stuff.
Yeah, I can relate to that. We all want to get a good deal, but we also don't want to feel like we're getting ripped off.
Exactly. And because of that uncertainty, you really need to be able to justify your price. You got to communicate the value you're offering and explain why your price is fair.
That makes sense. But how do you actually figure out the right price? Is there like a magic formula?
Kaufman outlines 4 different pricing methods: cost plus, market comparison, discounted cash flow, DCF, and value comparison. They each have their own logic and their own pros and cons.
Okay, break those down for me. Which one is the simplest to use?
Probably the simplest is cost plus. You basically figure out how much it costs you to make or do something and then add a markup to get your selling price. It's straightforward, but it doesn't always reflect the true value you're bringing to the table.
Right. Sometimes what something is worth is different than what it costs to make.
Yeah.
What about looking at what your competitors are charging?
That's the market comparison method. You check out what similar products or services are going for and then set your price accordingly. It can be helpful to get a sense of the market, but it can also lead to everyone undercutting each other, which isn't always good.
Yeah, you don't want to get caught in a race to the bottom. What about this discounted cash flow thing? That one sounds a little more complicated.
It is a bit more complex, yeah. It basically involves estimating the future cash flow your business will generate and then adjusting those cash flows based on their present value. It's more useful for valuing businesses or making investment decisions, but it can also be a bit speculative.
I can see how that could get tricky.
Mm.
So what's Kaufman's favorite pricing method then?
He really likes the value comparison method. It's all about figuring out how much what you're offering is actually worth to the customer. It's about quantifying the benefits and setting a price that reflects that value.
That seems like a smart approach. Focusing on the value you deliver, rather than just your costs or what your competitors are doing. But even with a great price, some people are still hesitant to spend their money. How do you overcome that natural resistance?
Kaufman is a big fan of guarantees. By offering a money-back guarantee or a free trial, you're basically taking the risk away from the customer. They feel more comfortable buying because they know they have nothing to lose.
That's a clever strategy. It shows confidence in what you're offering. It's like saying, I'm so sure you'll love this that I'm willing to give you your money back if you don't.
Exactly. But remember, everything we've been talking about, creating value, marketing, selling, delivering, managing the money side of things, it's all happening within a larger system.
Right? It's like this big interconnected web of stuff, right?
Yep. And Kaufman says that understanding how systems work is super important if you want to make smart decisions and really optimize your business.
Okay, so let's talk about systems thinking then. What are some of the big things to keep in mind when we're talking about systems?
Well, he brings up a bunch of interesting concepts, things like force multipliers, automation, bottlenecks, feedback loops, black swan events, and a whole lot more.
Wow, okay, that's a lot to unpack.
Uh-huh.
Let's start with the basics. What are force multipliers?
Think of it like this. Force multipliers are tools or strategies that help you do more with less effort. Imagine using a lever to lift a heavy object. That's a force multiplier.
Okay, so it's all about finding ways to be more efficient and get more bang for your buck. What about automation? That seems to be a hot topic these days.
Automation is about using technology to do things faster and more efficiently. It can free up your time so you can focus on more important tasks, but you got to be strategic about it.
You don't want to automate everything just for the sake of automating.
Right. You got to figure out where it'll actually make a difference. Now, what about bottlenecks?
Bottlenecks, those are the points where things get stuck, right?
You got it. They can slow down your whole process, making you less efficient. It's like that one slow cashier at the grocery store that holds up the whole line.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been stuck behind that person.
It's the same in business. You got to find those bottlenecks and fix them if you want to speed things up.
Makes sense. Okay, so what about feedback loops? How do those fit into the whole system thing?
Feedback loops are basically mechanisms that can either reinforce or reduce certain behaviors or outcomes. Positive feedback loops can lead to crazy fast growth, while negative feedback loops can help keep things stable.
Can you give me an example of that? I'm having a little trouble visualizing it.
Sure, think about a thermostat in a house. When the temperature drops too low, the thermostat kicks on the heater. As the house warms up, the thermostat senses the change and turns the heater off. That's a negative feedback loop, helping to keep the temperature nice and stable.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like a self-regulating system.
Huh.
But what about those black swan events we talked about earlier? Those sound a little scary.
Black swan events are those totally unexpected, high-impact things that can throw everything off course. Think like natural disasters, stock market crashes, or even, a global pandemic. They're usually outside of our control, and they can really mess things up.
Yikes. Yeah, those are no joke.
The thing is, Kaufman says instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, which is impossible, we should focus on building resilience and adaptability into our systems.
So being prepared for the unexpected and having backup plans in place.
Exactly. Acknowledging that we can't control everything and focusing on how we respond to challenges. But, we can't talk about systems without talking about the people working within them. That brings us to Kaufman's ideas about how to maximize your own personal effectiveness.
Right. It's great to understand systems, but we're the ones who have to navigate them after all.
That's the key. And Kaufman really dives into the psychology of personal effectiveness with concepts like perceptual control, willpower, loss aversion, threat lockdown, cognitive scope limitation, and even more.
Whoa, okay, that's a lot of big words. Can we break down a few of those for me? What exactly is perceptual control, for example?
So perceptual control is the idea that our brains are always filtering information, trying to focus on what we think is important. We only have so much attention to give, right? So our brains have to be picky about what they let in.
So it's like our brains are constantly doing a cost-benefit analysis, deciding what's worth our mental energy.
Exactly. And most of this filtering stuff happens without us even realizing it, based on our past experiences, our beliefs, and our goals.
So it's not just about trying to be more focused. It's about understanding how our brains work and making conscious choices about what we let in. What about willpower? That seems pretty crucial when it comes to personal effectiveness.
Oh, yeah. Willpower is huge. It's basically our ability to resist those tempting distractions and stay focused on what we want to achieve. Think of it like a muscle that gets stronger with practice, but it can also get tired if you overuse it.
So it's not just about being disciplined, it's also about being smart about how we use our willpower.
Right. Kaufman has some great advice on how to do that, like setting realistic goals and breaking big tasks down into smaller, more manageable chunks. He also explores this concept of loss aversion, which explains why we're often more motivated to avoid losing something than we are to gain something new.
Hmm, that's interesting. Makes you think about how we approach our goals and decisions. Are there any other big takeaways from this personal effectiveness stuff that you think are especially important?
Well, he talks about the power of priming, where just getting interested in something makes you start noticing it more in your everyday life. Like if you're thinking about buying a new car, you might suddenly start seeing that car everywhere you go.
Oh my gosh, yes. I do that all the time. I remember once I read this article about the history of bicycles, and for the next week, it felt like there were bicycles everywhere.
Exactly. It's crazy how much our subconscious minds can influence what we notice and pay attention to.
Okay, this is all super fascinating. But let's be real. We rarely do things completely solo, right? Most businesses, and pretty much every part of life, involve working with other people.
Oh, yeah, that's where things get really interesting and often way more complicated.
People can be unpredictable, and let's face it, sometimes totally irrational. And those social dynamics can be super tricky to navigate. What are some of the key things Kaufman says about working with others?
He dives deep into the psychology of collaboration, exploring all sorts of concepts like commander's intent, bystander apathy, clanning, social proof, authority, and this idea of commitment and consistency.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with commander's intent. What is that exactly?
So commander's intent is about explaining the why behind a task, not just the what. You're giving people context, helping them see the bigger picture so they can make better decisions.
Ah, so it's about empowering people to think for themselves, not just blindly following orders.
Exactly. It helps to foster a sense of ownership and accountability. Now, have you ever heard of bystander apathy?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I'm not sure I fully understand how it works.
It's this weird phenomenon where people are actually less likely to help someone in need if there are other people around. It's like this diffusion of responsibility. Everyone assumes someone else will step in.
So it's like the opposite of safety in numbers.
Exactly. It's counterintuitive, but it happens all the time. Kaufman points it out because it can be a big problem in businesses, especially when it comes to safety or ethical
Yeah,
issues.
you don't want people assuming someone else will take action when something's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, what about clanning? Is that just another word for teamwork?
It's kind of related to teamwork, but it's more about how humans naturally form groups and identify with those who share similar values or beliefs.
Ah, so it's like the classic us versus them mentality.
Yep. And while that can be a good thing sometimes, it can also lead to conflict and prejudice.
Are there any examples of how this clanning thing plays out in real life?
Kaufman mentions the Robbers Cave experiment. This was a famous study where researchers took a group of boys at summer camp and divided them randomly into two separate groups. Then they set up these competitions and challenges that pitted the groups against each other.
Okay, I'm picturing something like Lord of the Flies here.
It wasn't quite that dramatic, but it showed how easily conflict can start, even when the differences between groups are totally random. The boys quickly became super loyal to their own group and started seeing the other group as the enemy, even though there was no real reason for it.
Wow, that's fascinating. It just shows how powerful our social identities can be.
Totally. And it highlights the importance of trying to build bridges between groups and find that common ground.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground here, from the 5 core parts of a business to systems thinking, personal effectiveness, and now this fascinating look at how we interact and collaborate. My brain is officially full.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in. But don't worry, we'll break it down even more in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, we still got a lot to explore.
We'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually apply all these concepts to your own life and business.
Can't wait. But before we move on to the next part, anything in particular that's really resonated with you so far?
You know, what I find most fascinating is how Kaufman connects all these different ideas together. Like, on the surface, business principles, systems thinking, and personal psychology seem pretty different, but he shows how they're all related.
Right. It's not just about understanding each concept on its own. It's about seeing how they fit together to create a bigger picture.
Exactly. And that bigger picture can be really powerful.
I think what stood out to me the most is how important it is to understand your own mind and how it works. It's so easy to get caught up in all the external stuff, but at the end of the day, it's our own thoughts, beliefs, and actions that determine our success.
That's a really important takeaway. It reminds us that we have more control than we think.
Exactly. And that's what makes the Personal MBA so cool. It's not just about running a business, it's about becoming a more effective human being in all areas of life.
Totally. And speaking of becoming more effective, before we go, we've got a little challenge for you. Think about one small change you could make, based on what we've talked about today, that would make a positive impact on your business or your personal life. It doesn't have to be huge. Even something small can make a difference.
We'll be back soon with more insights from the Personal MBA. But in the meantime, keep thinking about that small change. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Let's jump right back into the Personal MBA. Remember those 5 parts of every business we talked about last time?
Oh, yeah, those were value creation, marketing, sales, value delivery, and finance.
Oh,
Like a well-oiled machine all working together.
exactly. And speaking of working together, we got to figure out how to create value that really hits home with the right audience.
Right, it's not just about creating something and hoping people will love it. You got to be strategic.
Exactly. Remember the iron law of the market. No market, no success. Kaufman suggests we start by figuring out who our probable purchaser is.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But remind me again, what's a probable purchaser exactly?
It's about going deeper than just basic demographics, you know? It's about understanding the specific person who's most likely to want what you're offering. What are their needs, their desires? What are they struggling with? What do they want to achieve?
So it's not just about age or income. It's about understanding their motivations. How do you even go about figuring that out?
Well, there are a few ways, but Kaufman talks about this thing called relative importance testing. It's a way to figure out what features, benefits, or values really matter most to your target audience.
So you're not just guessing what people want, you're actually getting data and insights.
Exactly. He also points out that people are driven by these core human drives, like the drive to acquire things, to connect with others, to learn, to protect themselves. If you can tap into those drives, you're way more likely to create something that people really connect with.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's say you've figured out who your probable purchaser is. You understand what they're looking for. But how do you actually reach them? They're not just going to magically show up, right?
You're telling me that's where addressability comes in. It's about knowing where your audience hangs out, where they get their information.
So things like social media, email, advertising, all that stuff.
Yeah, all that and more. It's about figuring out which channels are most effective for reaching your specific audience.
Right. Meet them where they are. Don't just throw a message out there and hope for the best.
Exactly. But even when you reach the right people, you still got to grab their attention. And that's harder than ever these days. How do you make your message stand out when everyone's bombarded with information all the time?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
That's where a strong hook comes in. It's that thing that makes people stop and take notice, makes them curious, makes them want to learn more.
So what makes a good hook? Is it all about catchy slogans and flashy visuals?
Those can work, but it really depends on your audience and your brand. A good hook could be a question that makes them think, a shocking statistic, a personal story that draws them in, or even something funny that makes them laugh.
So it's all about finding that unique angle that will grab their attention.
Exactly. But even the best hook won't do much good if you don't tell people what to do next.
Oh, right. You got to tell them what action to take.
You got it. That's where your call to action comes in. Tell them exactly what you want them to do. Visit your website, download your app, buy your product, whatever it is.
So it's not enough to just get their attention. You got to give them a clear path to follow.
Exactly. And you want to make it as easy as possible for them to take that action. Minimize friction, make it super clear and simple, and maybe even add a little bit of urgency.
You mean like those limited time offers or the only a few spots left messages?
Yeah, exactly. People are way more likely to act if they think they might miss out on something. But you don't want to overdo it with those tactics. It's all about striking a balance.
Okay, so let's say you've grabbed their attention, they've taken the bait, now they've decided to try out your product or service. What happens next?
That's when value delivery takes center stage. This is all about making sure you deliver on the promises you made during the marketing and sales process.
So it's not just about closing the deal. It's about making sure your customers are happy with what they get.
You nailed it. And Kaufman is a big believer in exceeding expectations. It's not enough to just deliver what you promised. You got to go above and beyond to create a really positive and memorable experience.
So those little extra touches that make people feel special.
Yeah, exactly. Like a handwritten thank you note, a surprise bonus gift, or just being super responsive when they have a question.
It's about building those relationships and turning customers into raving fans.
And those raving fans, they can become your best marketers. They'll tell their friends and family about how great your product or service is, and that's the best kind of advertising you can get.
It's like a chain reaction of happy customers. But we can't forget about the money part of the equation. Even the most passionate entrepreneurs got to pay the bills.
Right. That's where finance comes in. And Kaufman has a really practical approach to managing your finances. He stresses how important it is to understand your costs, your revenue, and your cash flow.
Okay, I got to be honest. Finance is not my strong suit. It can feel kind of intimidating. Where do you even begin?
Kaufman starts by breaking down some key concepts like overhead, costs, purchasing power, cash flow, and profit margin.
Okay, those terms sound familiar, but I'm not sure I can give you a clear definition of each one. Could you give me a quick refresher?
Sure thing. So overhead refers to those fixed costs, the expenses you got to pay no matter what, even if you don't sell a single thing. Think rent, utilities, salaries. Then you've got costs, which are the expenses directly related to creating and delivering your product or service. Purchasing power is basically how far your money can go. Cash flow is all about the money coming in and going out of your business. And Profit margin is the percentage of your revenue that you get to keep after you've covered all your expenses.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Having those clear definitions makes a big difference. But I'm curious, does Kaufman get into more complex financial stuff too?
Oh, yeah, he definitely does. He talks about compounding, which is how your money can grow exponentially over time thanks to interest, and leverage, which is using borrowed money to potentially boost your returns, but of course it comes with more risk.
Okay, yeah, those are getting a little more complicated.
They can be, but Kaufman does a good job of explaining them in a way that's easy to grasp. He also talks about bootstrapping, which is all about starting and growing your business with very limited resources, often by reinvesting your profits back into the business.
So being resourceful and creative when it comes to funding your growth.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that you don't necessarily need a ton of money to get started. But remember, all the stuff we've been talking about, creating value, marketing, selling, delivering, managing finances, it's all happening within a larger system, right?
That's like all these different pieces of a puzzle fitting together.
Exactly. And if you want to be truly effective, you got to understand how those systems work. It's about seeing the big picture, how everything's connected, and then finding those leverage points where you can have the biggest impact.
Okay, so more systems thinking. We touched on some key concepts before, like force multipliers, automation, and bottlenecks. Are there any other aspects of systems thinking that you think are especially important for entrepreneurs to understand?
One thing that Kaufman really emphasizes is the importance of always striving to get better. He talks about deconstruction, which is basically breaking down a process into its individual parts. Then there's measurement, which is tracking your progress so you can see what's working and what's not. And finally, there's optimization, which is all about making those tweaks and adjustments to improve your results.
So it's not enough to just set things up and hope for the best. You got to constantly analyze, refine, and improve.
You got it. It's all about having that growth mindset, always looking for ways to do things better.
That makes sense. But how do you know what to focus on? How do you know if you're actually making progress?
That's where key performance indicators, or KPIs, come in. These are those critical metrics that give you a snapshot of how your business is doing.
So it's about choosing the metrics that really matter and then tracking them over time to see if you're moving in the right direction.
You got it. But it's not just about tracking numbers for the sake of it. You got to understand what those numbers mean and use them to make better decisions.
Okay, yeah, this systems thinking stuff can be really powerful, but it can also feel kind of overwhelming. There's so much to think about and things are always changing.
It definitely takes effort to think systematically, but it's totally worth it. Remember those black swan events we talked about? Those totally unexpected things that can really shake things up?
Yeah, those are still kind of scary to think about.
I get it. They can be pretty unnerving. But Kaufman reminds us that we can't eliminate uncertainty. Instead of trying to control the uncontrollable, we can focus on building more resilience and adaptability into our systems.
So being prepared for whatever life throws our way,
Hmm.
having those backup plans ready to go.
Exactly. And one way to do that is through something called scenario planning. It's basically a thought experiment where you imagine different what-if scenarios and think through how you'd respond.
So like a fire drill for your business.
Yeah, kinda. It helps you figure out where your weak spots are and come up with plans for dealing with unexpected challenges.
That's a really cool tool. It makes you feel a little more in control even when faced with uncertainty.
It definitely can. But, we can't just focus on systems, right? We've got to talk about the people operating within those systems, too.
Oh, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's all about people.
Exactly. That's why a big chunk of the Personal MBA focuses on how to be as effective as possible as an individual.
Yeah, because it's great to understand all this theory, but it's up to us to actually do something with it, right?
Exactly. And Kaufman goes deep into the psychology of personal effectiveness with concepts like perceptual control, willpower, motivation, energy cycles, and cognitive biases.
Okay, there's some big ideas in there. Can we unpack a few of those for me? What is perceptual control, for example?
Right, so perceptual control is all about understanding how our brains decide what information is important and what to ignore. We only have so much mental bandwidth, right?
So it's like our brain has a filter, and it's deciding what gets through.
Exactly. And a lot of that filtering happens without us even being aware of it based on our past experiences and our beliefs.
Okay, interesting. What about willpower? That seems like a pretty important one when it comes to being effective?
Oh, willpower is huge. It's our ability to resist those temptations and distractions that pop up and keep us from achieving our goals.
So staying focused and on track, basically.
Exactly. And Kaufman has some practical tips for strengthening your willpower, but it's not limitless. You got to be strategic about how you use it.
Right. It's a resource. You got to manage it.
Exactly. Now, what about motivation? We all need that, right?
Yeah, motivation is what drives us, keeps us going when things get tough.
You got it. And Kaufman explores different theories about what motivates us and how to increase our own motivation levels.
Makes sense. Okay, so now we've got perceptual control, willpower, and motivation. What about energy cycles and cognitive biases? Those are new ones.
Okay, so energy cycles are those natural ups and downs in our energy levels that happen throughout the day. Some people are morning people, some are night owls, and we all have times when we're more focused and productive.
So it's about knowing your own rhythms and working with them, not against them.
Absolutely. Now, cognitive biases, those are like mental shortcuts our brains use to make decisions faster. Sometimes they're helpful, but sometimes they can lead us astray.
So we got to be aware of those biases so we can avoid making bad decisions.
Right. And Kaufman has some good advice on how to do that, like getting different perspectives and questioning your own assumptions.
This is all really fascinating. But again, let's be real. Most of us don't operate in a vacuum. We're constantly working with other people.
True. And that's where things get extra complicated and extra interesting.
People can be unpredictable. And those social dynamics, they can be tricky to handle. What does Kaufman have to say about all that?
He goes deep on the psychology of collaboration, talking about things like commander's intent, bystander apathy, clanning, social proof, authority, and the power of commitment and consistency.
Okay, lots to unpack there. Let's start with commander's intent. What's that all about?
Commander's intent is about explaining the why behind a task, not just the what. When you give people context, they can make smarter decisions and be more effective.
So you're empowering people to think for themselves,
Mhm.
not just blindly follow orders.
Exactly. It's about fostering ownership and accountability. Now, you've probably heard of bystander apathy, right?
Yeah, I've heard the term, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
It's this strange thing where people are less likely to help someone in need if there are other people around. It's like everyone assumes somebody else will step up.
So more people around actually makes it less likely that someone will help. That doesn't make sense.
It's counterintuitive, but it's true. Kaufman mentions it because it can be a real problem in businesses, especially when it comes to safety or ethical issues.
Right, you don't want everyone just assuming someone else will handle it.
Yeah.
Okay, what about clanning? Is that just another word for teamwork?
It's related to teamwork, but it's more about how we naturally form groups with people who are similar to us, people who share our values or beliefs.
Oh, so like the us versus them mentality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And while that kind of group loyalty can be a good thing sometimes, it can also lead to conflict and bias.
Are there any real-world examples of how that plays out?
Kaufman talks about this study called the Robbers Cave experiment. Researchers took a group of boys at summer camp and randomly divided them into two groups. Then they had the groups compete against each other in a series of challenges.
Okay, now I am picturing Lord of the Flies.
Well, it wasn't quite that extreme, but it did show how quickly conflict can pop up, even when there are no real differences between the groups. The boys became fiercely loyal to their own group and started seeing the other group as the enemy, even though they'd been randomly assigned.
Wow, that's crazy. Shows you how powerful those group dynamics can be.
Absolutely, and it highlights the importance of finding common ground and building bridges between different groups.
Okay, we've covered so much in this part, the 5 core parts of a business, systems thinking, and now this dive into the psychology of teamwork and collaboration. I feel like I need a nap.
It is a lot to process. But don't worry, we're almost there. In the next part, we'll tie it all together and talk about what you can do right now to put all this knowledge into action.
That's what I love about these deep dives. It's not just theory, it's about practical application.
Exactly. Before we wrap up this part, I'm curious, what's resonated most with you so far? What's sticking in your mind?
I think for me, it's the importance of understanding your own psychology. It's easy to get swept up in all the external factors like the market and the competition, but ultimately it all comes down to our own thoughts, beliefs, and actions.
That's such a powerful insight. We have more control than we often realize.
Yeah, and that's what makes this whole personal MBA thing so valuable. It's not just about running a business, it's about mastering yourself.
Well said. We'll pick up right where we left off in the next part. Until then, we want to leave you with a little challenge. Think about one small change you could make today to apply what we've discussed. It could be something as simple as setting a specific goal, identifying a bottleneck in your process, or reaching out to someone you admire for advice.
Small steps, consistently applied, can lead to big results. We'll be back soon with the final part of our deep dive into the Personal MBA. See that? And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Personal MBA. It's like we've climbed this huge mountain of business knowledge, and now we're finally reaching the summit.
It's been quite a journey. We've explored those core building blocks of business, delved into the world of systems thinking, and even ventured into the depths of personal psychology.
Now it's all about making sure we can actually use all this knowledge to keep learning, keep growing, and keep thriving in the ever-changing world of business.
Absolutely, because let's face it, things are always changing, right? There's always something new to learn, some new obstacle to overcome.
And Kaufman seems to embrace that constant evolution. He's not claiming to have all the answers, but he gives us this really solid framework for navigating all the twists and turns.
He definitely does. And one of the most useful concepts he introduces is the idea of comparative advantage.
Now, I vaguely remember that term from economics class, but how does that apply in the real world of business?
It's about recognizing that you don't have to be a master of everything. Instead of trying to be good at all the things, focus on what you're best at, and then team up with people who excel in the areas where you might be weaker.
So build a team where everyone's strengths complement each other, kind of like assembling a superhero squad, each member bringing their own unique power to the mission.
Exactly. Maybe you're an amazing strategist, but you struggle with the details. Partner up with someone who's super organized and detail-oriented, and boom, you've got an unstoppable duo.
Makes sense. And that ties into this idea of continuous learning, which Kaufman really stresses throughout the book.
Oh, absolutely. Remember, he talks about setting up a personal R&D budget, dedicating even just a small amount of money each month to invest in your own learning. That can make a huge difference.
So it's like saying, my education isn't over just because I finished this book. It's got to be an ongoing thing.
Exactly. The most successful people I know are always learning, always curious, always looking for new knowledge and experiences.
But learning isn't always easy, is it? I mean, sometimes it involves setbacks, even failures. How does Kaufman deal with that?
Well, he has a really healthy perspective on failure. He sees it as a natural part of the process, something you can actually learn from.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to experiment, to take risks, and then when you stumble, to get back up and learn from those mistakes.
You got it. He even talks about deconstructing your failures, like really figuring out what went wrong and why, so you can extract those valuable lessons and avoid making the same mistakes again.
Turning those lemons into lemonade. Maybe even a delicious lemon meringue pie.
I like the way you think. Well, we don't have to go it alone, you know? Kaufman also talks about the importance of mentorship, finding people who have already walked the path you're on and learning from their experience.
It's like having a guide to help you navigate those tricky mountain trails. A good mentor can offer invaluable advice and support.
Yeah, and it's not just about finding a mentor, it's also about being a good mentee.
So it's got to be a two-way street.
Absolutely. Be open to feedback, be eager to learn, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
It's a relationship, not just a one-sided thing. And it really speaks to the power of building strong relationships in general, both personally and professionally.
Because at the end of the day, business is all about people, right?
It's about human connection.
Kaufman makes that clear throughout the book. It doesn't matter if you're negotiating a deal, marketing a product, or leading a team. Those soft skills like communication and empathy are absolutely essential.
It's not just about numbers and data. It's about understanding and connecting with people.
Couldn't agree more. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are you taking away from all of this? What's been your biggest aha moment?
That's a great question. For me, it's the power of thinking in terms of systems. It's easy to get lost in the day-to-day whirlwind, but stepping back to see that bigger picture, understanding how all those different pieces interact, is really powerful.
That's a great insight. It reminds us that we have more influence over our circumstances than we sometimes realize.
Exactly. It's about figuring out the rules of the game and using them to your advantage.
And those rules, they apply to more than just business. They can help us in all areas of life. The Personal MBA is really a framework for making smarter decisions, reaching your goals, and living a more fulfilling life overall.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, we want to leave you with this challenge. What's one small step you can take today to apply what you've learned, from the Personal MBA.
It could be anything from setting a more specific goal to figuring out where a bottleneck is slowing you down. Maybe it's reaching out to a potential mentor, or even just taking 15 minutes to read a business article.
The key is to take action, because knowledge without action is like a seed that never gets planted. It has the potential to grow into something amazing, but you got to give it the chance.
So go out there, plant those seeds, and watch them grow. Experiment, iterate, and keep learning.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration into a new and exciting topic. Until then, keep those entrepreneurial spirits soaring.